feeling that it's a new chapter in the country's history, these protests. Today, when you look at it, when you see the violence of the last week, your thoughts on whether this culture of violence can ever go away?
The 2016 peace accord was a massive achievement. I mean, despite all the problems and, of course, all the flaws within it, because it effectively demobilized the biggest guerrilla force in the country, which had been waging a war for 50 years. Now, culture of violence, I'm not sure is the way to look at it, really. What you see in a place like Cali are a lot of people who've been displaced from conflict regions by all that fighting which is going on about drug routes, about illegal mines, about extortion rackets. And they've come to Cali and they are traumatized by what they have been through. For the government, they see a lot of people who are associated in some way, shape or form with armed groups. If you actually speak to them, they are probably trying to escape from armed groups. They're trying to get away from the conflict. But I think at the end of the day, the perception of the government and the perception of those people is different. But the reality they're referring to, a reality in which Colombia is gradually trying to come out of decades of conflict, but finding it very difficult to do so, is the reality we're seeing in large parts of the rural areas of the country. And to this, I would add that, yes, this government's response to most security problems tends to be based in the deployment of troops and additional military assets to tackle these groups. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be working in the current environment. So, I mean, I think there needs to be a conversation about changing the security strategy. The threats from armed groups in Colombia are very real. But the response of military and police deployment is not working in the way it is intended. So there needs to be a conversation about how do you deal with violence in Colombia's countryside. And I think there also needs to be a separate and very important conversation, which now we can have. Now that we don't have the biggest guerrilla group in the country, Colombia can have this conversation, which is how to bring down the chronic inequality in the country. Because it's inequality time and again, and Colombia is one of the most unequal countries in Latin America and the world. It's this inequality which is constantly causing these collisions and crises and protests and the mayhem which we've seen in recent days. And just to make a final point, this inequality has become so much more visible in the pandemic. Last year, it was all about people, the poorer people in overcrowded conditions, being exposed more readily to COVID. This year, it's about vaccination. Colombia has been very slow vaccinating its people. And of course, a number of elite Colombians in the private sector, but also in the state, have gone to the United States, paying their own way, of course, to get vaccinated. The reaction in the Colombian people, the people on the street, to this is of absolute horror, and understandably so. Those who can sort their own life out, get the vaccine, and go on living are allowed to do so, and they've just got to wait for one day when the vaccines might come to Colombia and cater for them. These are the issues which the government has to be addressing in its dialogue, and I very much hope it will.